All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the CS Leadership Roundtable. My name is Andrew Marks, co-founder of Success Hacker and our Success Coaching Training Program. We're back for our monthly live leadership roundtable today, discussing rolling out your first voice of the customer program. This free learning event is brought to you by Success Coaching, the world leader in customer success professional development training, with close to 5,000 graduates across nearly 70 countries. Our training programs are available as a pure online learning, monthly virtual instructor-led boot camps, and a hybrid 12-week coaching program that runs 3 times a year. We also offer a number of standalone courses, all taught by industry experts. In Q2, we'll be rolling out level 5 of our certified CSM curriculum and a number of new instructor-led training programs, including change management for customer success, having difficult conversations, and the first leg, I'm really excited about this, of our new management track, What Successful Managers Do, an entry-level management training program for aspiring new customer success leaders. You can find out more about our training programs at successcoaching.co. Now, which Ashley has kindly dropped in the chat, by the way. Now, for those of you who haven't participated in one of these events before, this is a live and unscripted discussion where we dig into a single topic that is relevant to customer success leaders. This script right here is really the only thing that I have scripted out for the entire webinar. Regardless of the company you work for, the details of your role, or the size of the customers your team deals with, we aim to pick topics that are going to be practical and useful to you. We also encourage you to suggest topics and guests for our program. So reach out and connect with me on LinkedIn and drop me a note. The schedule for our upcoming CS Leadership Roundtable events can be found also at the successcoaching.co. Just scroll to the bottom of the screen and click on the Events tab to find out what's coming up. As usual, we'll post a replay of this webinar along with the transcription early next week on our website. Now, there's a lot of thought leadership out there, along with a lot of theories about how to deliver customer success. And this series allows us to focus on the practical and give you real-world advice, best practices, techniques, and shared experiences from those out in the wild who are practicing customer success on a daily basis. And to do that, we invite 3 panelists to join me for a roundtable discussion. And these are people who are great at their craft, and we ask them to share their experiences and perspectives. We will be taking questions later on during the webcast, so please use that Q&A functionality found at the bottom of your screen to ask or upvote a question. So without further ado, I'd like our panelists to introduce themselves to y'all, talk a bit about who they are and what they do. And we're going to go in alphabetical order here. Let's start with David.
Thanks, Andrew. I'm David Ellen, and I'm the founder and chief customer officer of Centric Leadership Strategies. We're a consultancy focused on helping B2B companies with customer success strategy and execution. I've been in the customer success space or its precursors for over 20 years. And my last official corporate role was vice president of customer success for a large B2B division of eBay. Thanks.
Thanks,
Glad to
David.
be here.
Thank you. Glad to have you here. Thanks, David. Now, Melinda.
Hi, everyone. Melinda Gonzalez, Vice President of Customer Success at Pendo. I'm excited to be here having this conversation about one of my favorite topics, listening to your customers. I started my customer success career at Salesforce in 2004 and really had the luxury of seeing the transformation of that industry very early on, which is still transforming. I joined Pendo because of my passion for product-led customer success. I feel like that is the next gen evolution of what customer success looks like. And I'm eager to have this conversation today.
Excellent. Thanks for being here, Melinda. As always, lovely to see you. And Steve, last but not least, Steve.
Did you say lovely to see David?
No, I didn't.
No, you didn't.
I did.
So
you're right. You know what,
Goodbye.
David? Lovely to see you too. And Steve, lovely to see you as well.
Excellent,
sir.
excellent. Well, just a quick background on me. I'm one of the founders here at Waypoint Group. We started about 12 years ago, focusing specifically on the needs of customer feedback, voice of customer in B2B organizations. We came from a company called Satmetrics, which many people might remember that had since got acquired many years ago. But Satmetrics we were the company that did all the sort of science behind the Net Promoter System, Net Promoter Score. Some people think of it as score or system. Anyway, NPS, which was entirely consumer. The problems in B2B, the challenges in B2B are vastly different. And that was our rationale behind starting Waypoint Group and our TopBox SaaS platform.
Excellent. So is it score or system?
So the book said score, 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 because that was really what Fred wanted to evangelize was a KPI. We always talked about it as system, but that didn't quite make it.
No. Sounds like Fred won that fight.
He did. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you all for making time for us today. It's lovely to see you all. So let's get to the topic at hand. I've seen a lot of chatter recently in the customer success community about voice of the customer program. These voice of the customer programs capture, analyze, and report on all customer feedback, expectations, likes, and dislikes associated with your company and your product. But why do I need this? Right? I've already got product market fit. Why not just leave well enough alone? Because if I ask my customers what they want, they're going to tell me. I'm going to end up being on the hook for a lot more work.
Well, Andrew, it's interesting you say that. And I'd come back with, when you go on a date, why is it important to find out if the other person liked you after the date, right? Understanding customer sentiment's paramount about knowing where you stand with your customers. If they're unhappy and you don't know it, you can't fix their issues. And that behavior can turn into retention issues. If they are happy and you don't know it, then you're likely losing revenue expansion opportunities. So, if you don't ask for feedback, you're not going to get it, and you're going to go on assumptions. And once you go on assumptions, we all know what happens there. If you're wrong, you're in trouble.
I don't get a second date.
That's right.
Yeah, you'll end up being awfully alone. I think there's a lot of examples of companies that are in that situation, right? That essentially going out of business strategies by not engaging their customers in the right way. And I think over the course of the hour, we should really talk about that vexing word customer, right? Because in consumer, everybody knows who the customer is. You go in the store, you buy something, or you have a hotel room, you rent the night. But in B2B, there's a group of people that come and go, that make buying decisions. And you have end users, and you have stakeholders and influencers. And again, the complexity of people changing jobs all the time means the makeup of your customer is constantly changing. So definitely more challenging in B2B.
I think the other thing to add, maybe just as a context for this discussion, is just because you're listening to your customers doesn't mean that you have to implement everything they're asking you to do. And I think that there's the two very different things. One is listening, which I feel like is just a basic thing to do. But I think that understanding kind of what the feedback is, understanding where you are in terms of your product market fit. I like to use the example a lot of when we launched Idea Exchange at Salesforce and pushed that, integrated that into our product roadmap process. The teams that had the most tenured aspects of the product, like the sales automation aspect of Salesforce that had been tenured, had a lot of customers on it, they were eating that up. They were using that information to shape the roadmap, to evolve it, to make sure that they were up-leveling it. Chatter was just getting launched at the time. So the Chatter team wasn't necessarily leaning super heavily on voice of customer feedback because they were blazing a new trail with a brand new product. So the idea of listening to your customers, I feel like, is table stakes. What you do with that information is a much more nuanced discussion.
I 100% agree with you. And of course, I made that statement tongue in cheek. I actually had a CEO say that to me, though. Actually had a CEO say that to me. I'm like, dude, you can't approach your customers that way.
I don't think that's an uncommon response or an uncommon question either.
No, I've heard the similar kind of thing that, Andrew, I had a CEO say to me once, well, we can't let our customers dictate our strategy. And right. And
who else is there?
Right? I paused. I'm like, well, okay, but customers certainly should inform your strategy. Is your strategy on track? Is it working? How do you course correct? Right. So to your point, right, your customers aren't going to tell you what to do, but they should tell you what's working and not working in terms of their experience and outcomes that they're looking for, right? Is there a gap? If you can, right, address the gap. So Melinda, right, to your point, absolutely, you got to listen. But I think, and I'll throw this out there, is it more important to listen or to demonstrate that you're listening, to show your customers actually that you're there and following up and addressing what they're telling you? Maybe some combination of both.
Yeah, I think the cardinal sin, a lot of people think the cardinal sin is not asking for feedback. I actually think the cardinal sin is asking for feedback and then not doing anything with it.
Exactly.
Not following up, right?
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more, right? If they're important enough to ask for feedback, then they should be important enough to follow up in some way, right? And that doesn't necessarily, I think, mean you have to follow up one-to-one. I know we see a lot of companies use what we call a deep and wide feedback process before an EBR, as an example, right? So if you're scheduling an executive briefing review or whatever, CBR, QBR, whatever, I think we call them EBRs here, right?
EBRs.
In that EBR, don't waste executive time talking about problems and their experiences, right? Use that EBR to talk about solutions and joint success planning, right? So if you can get deep and wide feedback, understand, share back, be transparent back with that executive team, that stakeholder team in the EBR with, here's what's working and here's what's not working. Here's what other companies have done to address it. Now let's talk about how we're going to address that gap as a team, right? And you've got action items as a customer. We've got action items as a provider, vendor. But I think that's the only way to really effectively address what they're telling you in a high-touch environment. That's probably the most effective. There's obviously low-touch ways to do it as well. But
so, Melinda, what are some of the ways in which you got the EBR as an example, but how do we talk to our customers, and when do we talk to our customers?
Well, I mean, I think from a when perspective, I mean, the how, I think Steve just touched on. There's high touch, low touch, whatever that method of engagement is for your customers, whether it's, we're actually about to launch our first customer community this quarter. So we're really looking at leveraging that heavily as a one-to-many way to engage with our customers. I fully expect that we'll have roadmap information in there, changes to the roadmap based on what we're hearing. After I left Salesforce, the whole Idea Exchange initiative, true to the core, Parker Harris committed 10% of every release is dedicated to what they're hearing on the Idea Exchange. I love that idea. So doing stuff like that's kind of a good example, Steve, to your low touch contrast to your high touch example. From a when perspective, quite honestly, all the time. I personally, I think this whole idea of these big bang surveys, twice a year surveys, really hard for the business to digest and actually drive systemic improvements from. I think the ongoing listening to your customers, obviously I have a very product-led lens to all of this right now. So really, ideally, if you can get it in the product, awesome. But regardless, the more consistently you can get that flow of information coming into the business, obviously you need to have an infrastructure to, consume that information and take action on it. Much easier to do if you have a constant flow of feedback.
Melinda, I would add on to that while it's important to listen all the time, it's also important to figure out what you're listening for and what you're trying to get at, right? If you want to understand the effectiveness of an onboarding program, the time to listen and the time to ask is right after the onboarding process is completed, right? If you want to hear what your customers say about the value they receive from a business review, the time to ask about a business review is right after the business review. Feedback doesn't get old. It's not like wine. It doesn't get better with age. And the closer you can time feedback to an activity that you're trying to understand, that's, I think, a critical element.
So the frequency echoes the customer journey, the moments of truth, and those points in the customer journey that the customer's going through.
Absolutely.
Well,
yes.
Steve got something.
Yes, but.
Of course there's a yes, but.
Yes, and.
Yes, and I would add that it's not sufficient to really just look at touch point or transactional type of feedback,
sure.
right? There's definitely after your onboarding experience, I think it's really appropriate, very important to ask, are they where they expected to be? Do they feel ready to start acquiring the value, right? It's not, certainly elements within the process that the experience is important to understand. Did they have a good experience? But more important than that, I think, is, what was the outcome from that particular touch point? So measure the outcome. So for example, we talk about onboarding, but support is another one, right? I mean, the outcome, I think, should be they feel like you're there to support them when they need it, right? Are they feeling that way? It's a good opportunity to assess. Are they feeling that way? So there's transactional, but then periodically, time to value, maybe before renewal, those are relationship opportunities to really engage a core stakeholder team and get early warning signals about their time to value, renewal likelihood, some of those things that are obviously extremely important.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think the other lens to that, in addition to those two examples, would be product, right? So we have NPS running constantly within our product. It's fully automated workflow into the business. So through both positive and negative, we look at all of the feedback coming through our NPS channels. We review it as an executive team every Tuesday morning as part of our overall customer health review for the week. And that's kind of looking at more systemic trends and changes and requests that we're seeing coming through the product based on persona. We also use it as a way to follow up very kind of transactionally for both positive and negative feedback. So that information comes directly into our product operations team and gets fed into product and engineering. In some instances, it will actually get shared with the CSM so that the CSM can actually follow up with the customer to get some more information on that. Another really great example of a moment of truth or a milestone is what I thought was super cool when I joined was this idea of when you've hit your year anniversary in the product, we have this big kind of confetti, happy anniversary. What's the one thing that comes top of mind for you for this year? And that comes into us as well. So those are things that we celebrate about customers who have shared with us the milestones that they've achieved over the past year, or, areas where they've struggled. And we also have a closed loop process around this as well.
You just brought up a point that I think just needs to be highlighted. I think it's really important. And that is the sharing of information cross-functionally, right? And I think it should go without saying, but voice of the customer is a team sport. And a lot of people inside a company don't realize that. They think, oh yeah, the CSM, well, they own the customer. They own whether the customer is happy. And for some reason, they don't think anybody else can impact the customer. So getting everybody on board before you start a program and making sure everybody understands that it's truly a team sport, I think is a critical element in putting a program together.
Yeah, I would add to that too, David. It's super important, right? The CSMs have two jobs, right? Day to day working with accounts, but then also making sure that they're effectively addressing customer challenges across the business. And it's that second one, frankly, that gets deprioritized because of the day-to-day melee, right, with customers. But you'll never get out of that day-to-day deluge unless you address number two, which is some of the structural or systemic concerns or opportunities, right, that really should be addressed. And so I think I tend to recommend, I know working with individual accounts is important, but again, process improvement, driving structural changes that create promoters from the get-go, or advocates, whatever your word is, from the get-go, starting from this all the way through to the life cycle. If we're not focused on, right, driving that from a structural cross-functional point of view, I think, right, that's really what you're saying, David, is that, right, we've got to get other people engaged, and otherwise you're going to just be drowning in one-to-one interactions.
Well, I honestly think just having had the Salesforce experience of launching NPS at Salesforce out of the customer success part of the organization, when the majority of the feedback we were getting was product oriented and feeling like we were pushing that boulder uphill with respect to driving product changes, the program now sits within the product organization, which is the best place for it. I've had this complete mindset shift to yes, it's a team sport, but we're in the SaaS business. I don't know any SaaS company where the number one point of feedback isn't going to be the product, right? So I kind of have come full circle where these programs, so for us, our CAB sit in product, our voice of customer sits in product. I love that because most of the issues that we're having around like that bubble up in terms of themes, feedback, risk, churn, et cetera, are really product issues. And this is why, again, I say, I've seen so many companies use customer success teams as a Band-Aid for poor product design when the majority of the change agency is sitting actually within the product organization, engineering, of course.
So I have a really different perspective. I'm going to add but on that instead of and, right? Because I think there's so many odd persona that are not using the product that, and here, I guess here's the kicker for me, right? We see across our client base, many of the specific incidents of churn happen because of a change in leadership structure, right? So somebody, a champion, a decision maker, a budget holder, they leave and a new person comes in and they're tending to want to bring in the things that they know and love, right? Their bias is going to be towards other tools potentially. So there's a group of stakeholders that definitely have to be engaged to create promoters and right. So that when that change happens, you're not alone, right? You want to have a stable of promoters.
And that's what the customer.
I agree with you on that one. I feel like the nuance there though, Steve, that you're talking about is really stakeholder engagements, but the topic at hand in terms of driving, and let's dig into this because I think what you're talking about is stakeholder engagement. The topics that you're talking about, though, is the benefits that they're getting from the product. And they're going to be listening to the users in the organization.
Right.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Andrew, you got a debate on your hands now.
Yeah. This is good. I mean, I think of it differently because I think the product, what is the definition of the product, right? When you go into a grocery store and you buy a jar of spaghetti sauce, you know what the product is. There's an experience that goes with that, right? Which is ultimately I'm buying spaghetti sauce because I probably want to make an awesome dinner of spaghetti. So what's the product? Is it the spaghetti sauce or is it the meal that ultimately is going to get served? And the more, right? So there's different kind of levels of engagement. There's different, right? So what is the definition of product? I think a lot of companies aren't necessarily considering the whole product in their definition. Pricing, go back to marketing 1 in business school, the 3 Ps, right? Right, pricing, packaging, placement, whatever the Ps are, because everybody has different definition. But all those, especially packaging, go into a definition of what the product is. And I think if you're thinking about, I'm not sure, Melinda, if you're thinking about product as technology or if you're thinking about product as process and
the overall experience.
Outcome.
Yeah. No, and it's interesting, Steve. Yeah. This is, and I'm still unpacking this for myself, quite honestly. I joined Pendo in August. And so I feel like I'm going through this mindset shift, but what has been fascinating for me here and part of my own kind of learning experience is that at most, if not all other companies, we have shaped the services component of the experience, everything outside of the technology, based on, gaps of what the technology can or cannot provide. Here, if there's a gap, if there's an issue, if you think like product led, that mindset, the immediate next question is, how can we fix that in the product? As opposed to, so I think what I'm trying to unpack for myself and what I'm just still kind of working through is the experience in my world is very much product led. The solutions that we go to start with the product. And then the wrapper around the overarching experience, I completely agree with you. Now, obviously or not obviously, I'm talking about B2B SaaS tech in my world. So not the grocery store experience, but we wrap the services around that. But the solutions, the change agency, the improvements, the innovations, we do think product led first. And then we talk about like where the rest of the experience lies.
Yeah.
So you're both right? You're both right, depending on
totally.
where the company is in the evolution. Right? If you're a product-led company, maybe it makes sense to be there. And if you're not, it makes sense to be in customer success. So there's somebody out there, ringing the bell and saying it's about the outcome that the customer's looking for, folks. And
So I'm going to muddy the water a little bit and add another element to this.
Cool.
So, Steve, I think about it somewhat the way you're thinking about it, and I understand the way Melinda's thinking about it. But if I go to a grocery store and I buy spaghetti sauce, it's not just about the product, the spaghetti sauce, and it's not just about the meal. It's about the experience I had at the company where I bought it too. If I go in and buy the spaghetti sauce and I wait in line for 45 minutes to check out, not only do I have a bad experience about where I bought it, but that bad experience is now somewhat attached to the spaghetti sauce, right? So Melinda, in your case, in a SaaS product company, the product is transactional. It might be great, but it's the company that elicits emotion within the customer. And that's what customers remember. They remember emotion, how you made them feel. You could have the greatest product in the world, but if your CSM is 30 minutes late to a business review that's supposed to take an hour and it ends 4 hours later, then it doesn't matter how good the product is, the customer is going to walk away with a bad feeling about the company. I think you have to wrap it all together.
Yeah, right. And to Andrew's point, there's definitely, right, some companies are naturally product-led. Some companies are naturally, customer-led. And I think the first point along this path is, what's your strategy, right? So if you're looking to implement a voice of customer program, I think what we landed on here, correct me if I'm wrong, is what is the strategy of the company? Is it ultimately to provide sort of a complete solution that includes change management, that addresses the 3 Ps, that is driving specific outcomes? Or is it product-led, where you want to make sure that the product is delivering all the value, and maybe you're somewhere in between? So work that out, and then you'll understand which persona are going to be really important, what your timing should look like, your cadence for doing this, who's your stakeholder team inside your company, right? The core, who's the team of people that really wants the customer feedback, right? I think those are all telling parts of the process. Yeah.
So just a reminder, by the way, if you have questions, please use the Q&A functionality at the bottom of the screen. I love this. You're all right. How about that? We had a debate and everybody was right? It just depends. Right? It's one of those, it depends.
Yeah, I was joking about the debate. I do think it's very multifaceted.
Yeah.
Yes. There are some really good questions on the chat.
I want to jump into those in a minute, but I got a question actually for you, Steve. Last time you and I spoke, just one-on-one, we were talking about NPS, and I had the misguided notion that the beauty of NPS is that it's just a single question and we can get really high response rates. Out of that, you and I were talking about how actually you guys have proven that you can have a longer customer sentiment survey that's not just NPS and actually still have a high response rate. And I was wondering, what's the ideal length of a customer sentiment survey?
So we kind of use as a rule of thumb, communicating to the customer, this thing's been designed to take no more than 2 to 3 minutes, something like that, right? We don't call it surveys. It's all about,
love that.
We call them assessments. I mean, look, we need, who wants to participate in a survey, right? I don't know. Everybody gets these things all day long. But if I had somebody that came to me and said, Steve, I need your assessment of your experience and outcomes with us, right? I need to understand what's working and not working. And I'm committed to following up with you in some way, or I'm committing to address what you're telling me. Whatever that commitment is, right? Put that in there and make sure that they're definitely, if you're going to commit, you better do it. So don't commit like I'm committed to following up with you personally if you're not going to be able to do it. And to Melinda's point, a steady cadence all year long, right? Make sure that you have enough bandwidth to follow up. But there's not a hard and fast rule. To get to your point, I mean, we know that a 2 to 3 minute questionnaire tends to kind of end up like maybe 8-ish questions. And if you're looking at multiple persona involved in that questionnaire, you probably have coverage across maybe 15 different questions, right? Because, for example, an executive is never going to interact with support. Don't ask them about support, right? For example, right? They may not be interacting with the product, but they definitely are aware of value, outcomes, right? Some of these, and so anyway, no hard and fast rule, but we kind of say 2 to 3 minutes because that resonates with people. Look, it's only going to take 2 to 3 minutes. They're going to follow up with me. It's not going to go into a black hole.
Right. Okay.
I would echo. Yeah. I mean, my rule of thumb has always been 3 minutes, 7 questions. That's about where you're talking. Steve, the one thing that I've always known and I've used as a best practice is when you introduce the survey, the assessment, let's say you're doing it through an email, tell them how long it should take, right? A lot of people won't open a survey because they don't want to dedicate 15 or 20 minutes or 30 minutes to answering a survey. Right. But if you tell them that the survey is going to take no more than 3 minutes, make sure it's going to take no more than 3 minutes. You're more likely to get it opened. But live to that. Don't take advantage of it because next time they just won't open it.
Exactly.
I have a question. I think, I feel like.
Wait, you got to put it in the list. No, go ahead.
Surveys. I mean,
I like the
there are better ways to get feedback than surveys. Okay. And sure. I mean, I think surveys are a lift for the business to run. I think we all see whether it's obnoxious or less obnoxious pop-ups and websites, 5 stars, 1 to 10, whatever that looks like, doing it in the product, quick question. This goes back. I forget who made the comment earlier, but like recency in real time and in the moment is really important. And so, at the end of the day, I think if you're looking at a survey, yes, I think it's all good. Keep it short, keep it targeted, know your audience. Are they engaged? Are they not? There are a lot of, I think those best practices around surveys, but so many better options for collecting feedback. And I'm a really big fan of just doing it real time in the moment, depending on the experience.
I mean, it depends on your audience. If that's that's where they are and that's how they interact with you, great. If that's not where they are and if that's not their primary sort of interacting with you, so we're back there again.
Well, if you're a company that has a long tail of thousands of small and medium-sized businesses, right? You can't do interviews. It's hard to do roundtables or focus groups. So surveys might be the best thing. If you have a lot of enterprise customers, then one-on-one surveys, roundtables, focus groups are great ways to get feedback. Real time.
Yeah. Here's one of the reasons why I don't like surveys, right? Surveys sort of imply a sampling strategy, which means we're going to get back, let's say we have 100 customers, we have 10. Gartner says 6.8 contacts on average are part of a buying process, right? So let's say 6.8 times 100 accounts. So you've got almost 700 contacts that you're trying to talk to. That's a lot of people. First of all, if you spread it out throughout the year, it becomes just part of your cycle, part of what you do anyway. But the other big important element is drive up that participation, because if you look at 10 to 20% response rates and call it good, you have to recognize that means 80 to 90% of your audience is not responding. Why are they not responding? You've asked them, help me help you. I'm committed to addressing what you're telling me. Right. This is short and I've given you all the what's in it for me.
Yeah, spot on.
They still won't participate.
It's more interesting to see who's not responding than who is.
Right. Yeah, they are telling you something. They are definitely telling you something.
Well, that was the logic behind my original decision when I first started, trying to switch things up from the 20 question support survey to I just want to figure out where they are. Directionally, where are they at? And I would survey not just the key stakeholder, but the end users as well, because we got to make sure, we got to see if they're on the same page or not. But one of the thing that motivated me to just do the NPS was that I ended up with a much higher response rate, and I at least directionally knew where my customers were. but you opened my mind and my eyes to the fact that actually we can go a little deeper than that. So
that's why we're here, Andrew.
You all inspire me. Anyways. Let's be inspired by some of our guests. We've got a number of questions. I see, David, you've already volunteered to lead off the answers, starting with Matt. Matt, hey, great to see you, Matt. Love to see you here. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Matt, great question about, so Matt's question is, does a voice of the customer program deserve or need a dedicated program owner, or can it be delivered by a CX or CS leader? I'm a firm believer that a voice of the customer program has to have an owner. I think every program has to have an owner. There has to be accountability. Somebody has to set the strategy. Somebody has to be responsible for continuity. If you don't do that, nobody knows when the next thing is going to happen and who's planning it. And that's when things fall through the crack. So I think it's important to have an owner. Now, where that owner resides really, I think, depends on the company. I've worked with clients where voice of the customer resided in marketing because they thought it was a survey programming, and marketing is really good about communicating and doing surveys and things like that. To Melinda's point before, sometimes product owns voice of the customer as it does in her company. If you're a product-led company, it's very conceivable that product is going to want to own the survey program or the voice of the customer program. And I see in a lot of other companies where there isn't another group, everything tends to fall to customer success, right? We've talked about that in other community events where customer success cleans up and takes ownership of anything that nobody else wants. And so sometimes it resides there. What do you guys think?
I think there's a distinction between who is leading the program in terms of the structure and the orchestration of it, and where the responsibility and accountability lies in the organization. And I'm being very specific about not saying that everyone owns it, because we know what happens.
Right.
But I think that
runs it. Right.
I think that at the end of the day, the person who is kind of leading and orchestrating the program needs to be in the part of the business. David, just like you said, it could be in marketing, could be in product, could be in, the customer success portion of it. They need to be in the part of the business that actually has the power to drive change and innovation throughout the company. So I think that the person leading it is doing just that, kind of like the puppet master, but they don't own the actual driving change from it. There needs to be people accountable within the business,
yes,
to drive that change, make decisions, spend the money, hire the people, whatever the case is, to drive changes and improvements.
They're the facilitator of the change, but change has to happen in those different organizations. Excellent. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for that. Hey, can you hit the answered button there so that goes away? Chad's up next. Melinda's volunteered to jump in on this. When running an NPS 100% of the time, do you always have to have a closed loop on all the negative responses? Is that expected by any customer that responds negatively? If you have to respond to all the negative ones, how do you scale that?
So there's a creativity element of this, which I openly admit. I would immediately go to marketing and other parts of the business to say, like, let's get creative about how do we scale the responses around this. There are a lot of different ways that you could do that, whether it's through your community, whether it's through a follow-up email to the same distribution list that you sent the survey to, whatever that. There are a number. I'm probably not the expert in how to scale that kind of follow-up, but and all the different channels with that. But what I will say is, yes. I mean, they're already not pleased,
right?
And they gave you even more of their time to tell you what they thought about it. So, I mean, on a philosophical level, hard yes to responding to all negative responses. Work with your marketing organization and other people in the business to understand how best to scale that. If you have a community, awesome. Be transparent. Get it out there. Hey, here's what you heard. Top 3 things that we're doing well, top 3 things that we're sucking at right now. And this is what we're trying to do about it. It's not going to be overnight. We're making these investments, right? Whatever that is. I think that's important. The other thing I will also say is if you're really trying to get granular about, NPS and understanding where your promoters, passes, and detractors are, it was really interesting when we started to dig into that data at Salesforce, because we were looking at what were the actual issues and the themes affecting passives and detractors. And if you want to get really systematic about it, you can look at where you can have some really quick wins to get more individuals into that promoter category. In some instances, it might be easier for you to get detractors into that promoter category with some quick low-hanging fruit. In other cases, it might be a better option for you to really tackle the passives and the issues coming up with that particular audience there. But yes to responding 100%.
No debate here, Melinda. No debate here.
Yeah, totally agree.
Thank goodness.
Steve,
I'm so
I
glad
thought you were going to say
Steve.
no need to respond.
No.
That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah, I would echo
Feeling
your
validated.
comment.
Thank you.
You have to address it in some way. You have to. I mean, if they're giving you the gift of their time, you gotta, right? Maybe it's a one-to-one follow-up. Maybe it's a peer-to-peer follow-up. Like if it's an executive at a tier 1 strategic account,
Totally. Maybe
your CEO follows up, right? I mean, so, or maybe it's a one-to-many email, but I would agree completely. You have to follow up. That begs a little bit of an addition, of course, because, of course.
Yes, and.
Right. Yes, and. My philosophy is always, or my approach is always, that customers are never going to be able to cause, right? Never is a hard word, but they're going to give you symptoms. I experienced this. I thought I was going to get that. This is not working well for me, right? They're going to give you symptoms, just like when you go to the doctor, right? You go to the doctor, hey, it hurts when I do this. Now,
and yes, and it's not their job, right? So
right.
Yeah,
so
that's what you're saying.
The important thing in the follow-up is to not just address what they're telling you, because the first and foremost, you gotta put any issues to rest, right? But then the second step is, okay, now that I got you, there's 3 questions I need to ask, right? The first question is like, look, tell me specifically, what did you experience, right? Just let's get it out here. I know we like, but let me just really understand and get in the customer's own words what they experienced. Then the second question is the most awesome in my opinion, which is, well, what did you expect instead? Right. And right. And then a follow-up question, well, where did those expectations come from? Why did you expect that? Did we tell you that? Did a different competitor, a different company tell you that? I mean, where's that coming from? So if you really want to fix structural systemic issues or concerns, or create more and more promoters on a more scalable basis, understand expectations and where they came from, right? So you can fix it at the source. I don't know if that's controversial, but in the follow-up is a great opportunity to ask those 2 or 3 additional questions.
For sure. And actually, an add-on to this from Amber, because it's related, how do you effectively reach out to a customer that responds to an NPS survey with a detractor score but doesn't provide any comments or feedback?
Well, I mean, I think that 2-question or 1-question, assessments are not an assessment. We've got to ask some additional questions about what are they assessing, right? So to our earlier discussion, but the other thing is, yeah, absolutely. Like, okay, I see there's an issue here, but I want to help you. Right. I need more information about what it is.
Right. You could just pray that for the people who did leave comments, it's one of those. Right. And so when you send out that mass email back to everybody saying, hey, we know we do well here and we know we fail here, it's covered. But I guess it also depends on what kind of volume we're talking about. When I had 400 customers and we got detractors, I actually doled out the detractors to each of the executives. I said, hey, these are all product related. So head of product, I need you to call these customers, and head of sales, I need you to call these customers. But when you have thousands of customers, that's not feasible.
Yeah, if you're dealing with high value enterprise customers, I think there's no better way to respond to something like that than to pick up the phone and call them and say, tell me more. I'd love to hear more. Exactly. If I don't understand it, I can't do anything about it. So tell me more and I'll tell you what we've done about it or what we're going to do about it.
Yeah. And it's not an if you should do it, if you should do it, period.
Yes.
I think,
sorry, go ahead, Melinda.
You should do the follow-up. Is that what you're saying?
I think if you get a 4 from one of your stakeholders and they don't leave any commentary, that's a pick up the phone and call them, right?
Well, yes. I mean, I think we're talking, it depends on if it's high touch, low touch, right? If it's a customer in that long tail category, there's probably a better way of doing that. But yeah, I think in all just by sheer fact that they're in your high touch category, good, bad, or passive, thank you for the feedback. You're probably having direct conversations with them already. If you're not, if you're trying to get them re-engaged, if they've ghosted you, if they've gone dark on you, another great opportunity to follow up. Hey, we just got this feedback from some of your users. Curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't assume. Hey, can you? Thanks, Chad, for the question. The next one comes from Zach. Zach, NPS, what response rate should we be reaching for in the SaaS space?
So I have.
Come on, Steve. I know you have.
I look directly at Steve on that
one. Yeah, everybody knows I'm an opinionated bastard on this particular topic, right? In a high touch account, it is realistic and achievable to get close to 100%. If there's 10 core contacts that you want to engage with, there are definitely techniques, and I'm happy to follow up with email on some templates or whatever. So there are some templates that we can use. But 80, 90, 100% is definitely achievable in a high touch environment. In a low touch, long tail, we typically would see 20 to 40%. It's a matter of making sure that that customer really understands what's in it for them and why should they participate. But secondly, people will respond to these requests really when it coming from somebody they know and trust. That's fundamental. So what we've really found is, and I've been doing this for over 20 years between Satmetrics and Waypoint and with Topbox, all the companies we've looked at, generally speaking, it's not necessarily about the 2 to 3 minutes. It's about, you're asking me to expose myself, right? You're asking me to open up. I got to work with these people every day, and I'm going to potentially provide some negative feedback or constructive feedback that could be taken. And I don't know if I want to do that, right? So we got to put their minds at ease with regards to wanting to expose themselves, right? Is the first thing. And then the second thing is, if you can engage your champion to help you recruit, right? So if I'm a CSM, the first thing I want to do is engage my champion there and say, we got this thing that we're doing, right? Need your feedback. We're committed to following up with you. Will you participate? They'll say yes, right? Once you've had that opportunity. Now it's like, okay, here's these other people inside the account that I need their participation as well. I'm committed to sharing the feedback back with you as a champion. It will be anonymized. You won't see who's saying what. But in order for us to work together and understand what the right plays are to drive the change, you as my champion need to see this feedback too. So will you help me get them to participate? I'm going to send you an email. Please forward it on to them to drive up participation. That kind of motion tends to work really well, again, to drive up to that 80, 90% and higher.
Steve, that example is so spectacular. Thank you for sharing. I think that it's so applicable to kind of what that high touch engagement really entails and what that looks like. My hunch in this question is that it's couched in, if I'm sending 10,000 surveys to customers that I never really talk to and I don't really know, what's the expected response rate that I can get? It's not saying I guess I'm just kind of inferring, right? I think generally if you're looking for just a target response rate, I would read the context of that question being, you're really looking for a mass email outreach to a large swath of customers that you may not be engaged with more directly otherwise. And that's the reality for a lot of companies, right? So I'm curious to get your thoughts in that scenario. The premise is kind of broken, right? They're not engaged with you and you're not talking to them in the first place. I don't know.
Right.
Curious to get your thoughts on that one.
Well, I mean, if we're getting feedback along the customer life cycle, not doing the event, then I don't think you're sending it out to 10,000 people all at once, right? But I also know that, the response rate starts.
That distinguishes like transactional versus relationship surveys, right?
No, not necessarily. I mean, 3 months before renewal might be a really appropriate time to get feedback, or a month before a QBR would be relationship feedback. I mean, so based on, or time to value, if you're onboarded in day one and then 3 months after, you're expected, you should be perceiving value. Are you, right? So there are life cycle moments to understand the relationship, not just the transactions, right? So it's both. It's definitely both. I just think that if you're only looking at response rate in the aggregate, then you're kind of missing an opportunity about understanding the account health. I mean, yes, definitely adoption, usage, these are important things. But at the end of the day, are they happy and successful, or are they not happy and successful, right? And there's a group of people that we are especially important to answer those questions of. So I think if you can't apply it at the account level to be able to take some action around customer account health, right, it becomes more difficult to move the relationship needle. If you're just looking at transactional, right, then maybe not as important to understand the account level, although it's still part of the account experience, right? So I wouldn't discount it. Yeah, I mean, do you have a different point of view, Melinda?
No, I think you're spot on. I mean, I think that I do feel like the challenge is companies, for lack of really having, for example, the example that you gave earlier on the high touch, hey, talk to your champion, get your champion engaged to like rally, that's a lift. So I think that I recognize that in many instances, a lot of companies, I think there was another similar question, what's the right stage of maturity and when do you invest these resources? And so I do think there are scenarios where you maybe don't have the level of resources that you can apply to engage that strategically. So how do you do that? I think for lack of having those resources, how do you do this in a more
right? You have to automate
way?
You definitely have to automate it. I couldn't agree more. I'm not sure that automation means completely changing the approach, but asking for an opt-in, asking your champion, to explain the program. There's a question on here about, do you name the program? Do you articulate it? I hope we'll get to that, because while Mike Gosby, definitely, I respect him and he's got a great addition to this, I would add that the opportunity to explain this isn't just a survey, right? That we have a real program here, and companies that have branded their programs, like I can give you some examples: Talix Connect, IntelliSecure, Intune. There are programs out there that have specifically branded because they really want to say, this isn't about a survey, this is a demonstrated listening effort. And then you can automate kind of in that process, send out the emails automatically and ask them to opt in, update Salesforce. So you've got the opt-in. Now send out the next thing, help me engage the champion. I mean, the rest of the team. Those things anyway are definitely feasible, easy.
David, you got anything to add here to Steve and Melinda's conversation?
I'm letting them go at it, man.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's great.
I want to see who comes out on top. Yeah. No, my general opinion is I think I agree with Steve about really shooting high for a response rate, but I also think that there are a lot of people sitting on the call saying, look, we understand that we'd love to get 80, 90, 95% response rate. The reality is we're surveying 10,000 customers and we're getting 15%. Is that good? Right. And so, my answer to that might be a little bit different. And I'd say, Steve isn't going to like this, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it one-on-one, this weekend or something. But, I think if you have a long tail of customers that you're doing a survey for and you're issuing it via email, if you're getting above a 30% response rate, I would say it's a good start. You shouldn't be happy with it. You shouldn't be comfortable with it. But I think it's a good start. I think if you're below 20%, you've got a lot of work to do. And I just didn't want to shortchange. I don't remember who asked the question, but I didn't want to shortchange them because I had a feeling where I knew where they were going. And, it's not like I have 20 high touch customers. What kind of response rate should I get? I've got thousands and thousands of customers. I can't go talk to each of the champions individually. So that would be my answer. I'd say if you're below 20%, you got a lot of work to do. If you're above 30%, you've got a really good start to build on.
I'm right there with you. It's a journey.
Okay. So we won't have to fight it out after.
So I got.
Hey, I was going to let David and Steve go at it. Like,
I got a question for you, Melinda. I know you need to go, so I'm going to throw this out here to you, and then David and Steve and I can continue the conversation. Ed Powers asks, what are your thoughts on mining customer sentiment in text exchanges? So Slack channels, support emails, internal emails, using NLP and incorporating this in voice of the customer. Do you have any? I mean, you talked about not doing traditional surveys, right? Do you have any experience with that sort of thing? Any exposure to that at all?
I'm certainly not the expert on that. I do think that the importance of understanding, sentiment. I know there are a tremendous amount of companies out there doing sentiment analysis on the qualitative insight. Steve, you probably have a good grasp of this also. I do think that it's important, right? I mean, the human language is complex. And so understanding, sentiment as a contextual backdrop to the feedback that you're getting is really critical. And without it, I think you probably only have half of the solution.
Yeah. Okay, for sure.
Yeah,
David, Steve, you guys have something to weigh in on that?
I mean, yeah, there's a lot of ways to get feedback, and there's definitely, to Melinda's point, there are companies that can definitely do a good job of mining that, right? Loop VOC, MetaCX. I mean, there are. Just know, though, that again, the stakeholders, or I should say, the persona, right? Where are they? Right? You want to get feedback where they are, right? You live in their world, so if that's where they're interacting with you, then absolutely. And there are some interesting technologies out there that can really do an effective job with that.
I think that's a. Sorry, go ahead, Andrew.
Go ahead.
I think that's a really good point, Steve. A very good point in terms of placement, right? So if you're talking to executives, more than likely, it's on their cell phone, right? So there's that, right? We have a Pandemonium Slack channel where we have a bunch of our customers in there. And now those are users. Those are individuals who are engaged. Those are probably a lot of individuals who are going to migrate into our customer community, be engaged there. So I think that's a really, really spot on point around placement of the collection channels. And then that ultimately dictates the sentiment analysis and kind of level of investment there.
Yeah, it's not just the timing, it's how. It's the how behind it. How are we going to get to them? How are we going to get the response?
See, I'm gonna leave on that positive note.
yeah, you are. Hey, I'm sorry you can't stay for the rest of it, but
I'm so sorry.
It's as usual. It's great to see you. Thanks for your contribution, and we'll definitely have you back on again.
Yeah, no, I think sir, if you're yes, this has been wonderful. Love the conversation. Always happy to have these discussions and reconnect with all of you. Take care, everyone.
Good to see you, Melinda.
See you, Melinda.
Good to see you too.
We're staying on, though.
We're staying on. We're staying on. Yes.
Andrew, I think that question really ties into another question that Noran asked. And he asked, what are better, oops, it just went away. There you go. What are better ways of getting feedback other than surveys, right? So we've started talking about these how to do surveys. But, I think it's important to understand that there are one-to-one methods of getting feedback, and there are one-to-many methods of getting feedback. So obviously the one-to-one methods are relationship surveys, NPS, Pulse, transaction surveys. Customer interviews is a good way. If you don't want to do surveys, schedule a 30-minute customer interview. But do the same amount of work on design of your interview questions as you would of survey questions. Executive sponsor programs are great ways for your executive to talk to an executive at your customer and get feedback during that. Looking at support tickets and getting feedback from support tickets, right? If you've got an enormous amount of support tickets giving you negative feedback about a certain feature in your product set, that's feedback. I mean, that's actionable feedback that you can work on. Customer service calls are the same way. Chat sessions are the same way. You can pull out verbatims out of chat sessions. And then in the one-to-many environment, you look at your community, do roundtable discussions, do focus groups, do customer advisory boards, get feedback during your business reviews. Those are all great ways to get feedback other than surveys.
Yeah. Steve, you got anything to add?
No, I'm going to leave that alone. That's great. I couldn't agree more.
Excellent. So actually, Steve, you volunteered to answer Sama's question here.
Yes. Hey, Sama.
You want me to read it? You want to read it? You want me to read it? Okay.
I got it. Right. So maybe we should have started this question, right? What is the definition of voice of customer anyway, right? This is going to be a good discussion. So I mean, I look at it, voice of customer is really, you got to be able to translate what you're hearing and what your customers are thinking and feeling into data. And right, so that we've talked about, multiple persona. There's also multiple tiers, right? The way you work with a high touch customer, totally different than the way you work with a low touch customer. So, right, those elements kind of need to go into your program design. I would say a voice of customer program, when it's firing on all cylinders, is got multiple listening posts across the customer journey. It's got multiple listening posts out in the marketplace, is pulling in data, allowing that data to be actioned one-to-one where appropriate, allowing the data to be actioned one to account, right? Where appropriate, like at the account level, maybe it's more appropriate to follow up with an exec or champion, or one-to-many, right? Again, and Melinda talked about an email that goes out. Here's what we heard. Here's what we're doing about it. I mean, so that I would say is, I think, the definition of a voice of customer program, not just collecting data, but driving the right actions after you've collected data or as you're collecting data. David, I'm sure you have a lot to add on this.
No, I think you covered it there a lot. Many years ago, I was a chief operating officer at a company, and we were getting certified in ISO. I don't know if anybody's familiar with ISO, but basically, people used to ask me for a definition of ISO in plain English, and I always said, say what you're going to do it, and then prove that you did it. And I think with voice of the customer, it's kind of the same thing, right? It's tell them you're going to ask them for feedback, ask for the feedback, receive the feedback, take action on the feedback, and take action on your non-responders, close the loop, track the progress, rinse and repeat, but do everything you're planning on doing. Saying you're going to do.
A lot of people would say, I don't have time for this, right? I'm so busy with all my other things. And I guess I'm asking, well, two things. One is, are those other things as important as this? I mean, they might be urgent, right? So on that 2x2 of urgent and importance, they might be urgent. You got a customer who's screaming about a support ticket. They might be urgent, but how important is it in terms of managing or impacting churn, expansion, the relationship? I mean, there's a priority discussion that has to kind of happen in there too.
Well, you got to have a balance, right? You got to have a balance. Right? You got to be doing both, quite frankly. You can't pick one over the other, because it is so important. Because your urgent issue may be you may be dealing with something right now, but but this voice of the customer is something that's going to be dealing with hopefully for a long time, right? Because we're playing a long game here. We're not playing a right now game. We're playing a long.
Important point, right? It's not necessarily about this quarter. It's about next quarter, the quarter after that, the quarter after that, and making sure you have the hockey stick, right? Can I add one little thing? I know I keep doing this.
I just add one little thing.
One of my favorite quotes. I'm just a softie. Oprah Winfrey. I'm sorry.
Really Oprah quote, man.
Oprah quote.
Okay.
So
all right.
Oprah, when she retired, right, from TV, she said, I've interviewed over 30,000 people on this program, and they all have one thing in common. And the one thing is they all want to be heard. They all want, does what I'm saying matter? Do you care about what I'm saying? Right? She says that people just want to be heard. And so even if you feel like you know the answer, it's still good to ask the questions to get customer feedback, to engage them so that you can demonstrate listening, right? If you're not going to demonstrate listening, Oprah is going to tell you you're falling on your sword.
I had a client I worked with a couple of years ago that didn't have a voice of the customer program. And their reason for not having a voice of the customer program was because they were channeling all of their money and resources into product development. And I asked them how they understand what the market wants in terms of products and features and what they're willing to pay for. And they said, well, our product development people kind of know what the cool next greatest thing is. And I said, well, what percentage of the new features and functions that you produce actually get sold and paid for? And it was actually a very low percentage. It was the 80-20 rule, right? 20% of the things that they developed actually got sold. And I said, well, if you knew what those things were in advance, and you can put the other 80% of your time into understanding your customer's sentiment and their view of the product, you might have a much higher take rate on the new features you're putting out there. And they went, oh yeah, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Why would I want to listen to the people who are actually supporting my business, right?
Yep.
And actually, I want to piggybacking on this. Matt asks, "Voice of the customer is very wide encompassing. How do you consider and involve customer comparison, review websites? How do you consider social media feedback? How do you consider cabs?" I think we've established cabs are part of VOC. I'm going to assume that we're going to want some pulse on social media, but those comparison review sites, the G2 Crowd, the Capterras of the world, those would be included as an element in the VOC as well. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we talked before about mining, text mining, Slack channels and the like, and absolutely these technologies are all about doing that too.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the other thing I would add to that, in addition, is that when you think about other areas of getting feedback, the question went away, and there was one part of the question on the bottom that I was going to respond to, and I can't remember what it was. But he asked about cabs and then social media. That's the other one. Social media, I think you have to be very careful with, because there are people that want to be heard on social media because they have an ulterior motive. But I think you do have to respond on social media. Social media is very easy to be picked up by investors, if you're a public company or if you're VC owned or something like that. So I would just say be careful on how you respond with social media. If you have a legal team, make sure that they provide guidance on the framework of how to respond on social media, but you still have to respond.
Agreed. A couple more here. Let me see here. Francis asked, this may be a little more tactical, but are VOC programs ran by solely committee group, or do you have a designated POC responsible for trying to do this? I think we've established that idea. You need to have somebody who owns this.
Yeah.
And more than just this is a part-time of the head of customer success. There needs to be it may sit in, if it sits in customer success, there needs to be somebody who then works for that person who owns VOC for you to be effective.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of complexity to this as we've discussed.
Yeah, a program manager, right? And the program manager doesn't necessarily have to be like the one who provides all the answers, but should be a good resource manager. I mean, there are definitely pockets. So, for example, if one CSM is seeing really high participation customer response rates, right, from their customers, and another one's not, then the program manager might intervene and say, well, what is that person doing that we can replicate to other parts of the business? As an example, program manager needs to stay on top of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Gavin, good to see you. I'm a process-led fan. Personally, there has to be change management, but the point is well made that CS can't be the only one in the ring. I think he's referring to, getting that feedback and having, doing something with it, actioning it. does this different stage of a company dictate how you hear the customer? What are the best practices for tech touch versus high touch? I think we covered a few of those, and you do need to gauge how you hear the customer based on how they want you to hear them, right? We want to pick the channels and the frequency that match up to the people that we're reaching out to. Like you said, your executive meeting, it's via phone, and maybe it's once a quarter, but your end users want you to hear them on a weekly basis, right? And
yeah, I had an example at a company I worked at many years ago where one of our largest value enterprise customers told me, the executive sponsor told me that their company does not allow them to respond to surveys, but they wanted to provide feedback. What's the best way to do that? And we worked out an interview process with them. We did one-to-one interviews, and then we did roundtables with them because they really wanted to provide the feedback, but they weren't allowed to answer surveys. And you sometimes have to figure out those other channels to be able to talk to those high-value customers.
Yeah, I've even seen, for example, so like in public sector, a lot of times you'll see, federal government, for example, does not allow you to participate in surveys.
Right.
But they will answer or respond to an assessment. I mean, right? So it's a nuance.
It says assessment. It's not a survey.
That's right.
Right. Yeah.
Right. We had the same thing happen. See, there are several companies that have blanket policies. There's a big, fruit company in Cupertino that has a policy. You're not allowed to participate in surveys, and yet when we send out sort of assessment requests with a commitment to follow up to address what they're telling you, we do see them participate. So, so words matter, I guess, right? You don't have to use my word assessment. I don't care what word you use. Just think deliberately about what you're asking the customer to do.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. No, words matter. Words do matter. Very much so. One last, Heather asks, do you all use a tool to analyze open-ended feedback?
There are, Steve, I'll go ahead and start and you can kind of feed in. There are tools out there that are great for scraping data and looking at key phrases. You can actually put in certain words that you want. The names of the technology escape me right now, but there are definitely certain tools out there that you can use to either scrape written data or even voice data. We had a very large customer support team that answered a lot of chats and a lot of phone calls, tens of thousands a day. And we had a tool that went in and listened automatically and pulled out certain things and then gave us the verbatims.
Yeah, super helpful to be able to do that. I've mentioned a couple of companies earlier, and I'm happy to follow up with people. I have, I'm not biased in any ways on this. I've just seen that in a lot of ways, it also depends on volume of feedback, right? So if you have high volume of feedback in those channels, these technologies tend to work a little bit better. But again, also know your persona, right? So if you're looking at screen scraping, text scraping, just know that who's the persona that are interacting with those, what feedback you're going to get back from that particular audience, and know who you're not going to be hearing from, and how are you going to hear from those other people, those other persona that are so critical.
Yeah, the silent majority.
Right.
All right, gentlemen, I can say that now because Melinda's not here. But to the two of you, we're at the end of our webinar. Thank you, everybody out there who's joined us. I think it went well, but it's not what I think, it's what you think. So please let us know by posting your feedback on LinkedIn and tagging us. I want to thank my amazing panel of guests for spending time with us today, as well as our prep call last week. Everybody here very much appreciates you all making time in your schedule to provide these insights as best practices that you share. It was a great conversation. We probably could have gone on for another few hours, but I think the attendance would severely drop here soon. One final note, though, great CS leaders know that they don't have all the answers, but they know where to get them. That's why we created the CS Leadership Roundtable, to harness the knowledge and experience of the community to help improve everyone. So We hope you got something out of this discussion, and we'll see you at our next event on April 14th when we'll discuss integrating a change management strategy into your customer journey with another great group of panelists. Check out successcoaching.co to find out more and to sign up. Until we see you again, have a great rest of your day, week, and month. Stay safe and stay healthy. Good. Stay healthy, everyone. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All
Thank you.
I'll talk to you guys soon.